Copyright Steve Madison 2020. All rights reserved. Table of contents. The musical theory of existence, mind music, the metaphysics of music, the general root that pulls universal feelings, Parsifal, the curiosity, pessimism, the romantic tranquility. Genius, will, and idea, music, and the will, Nietzsche, and music, the Orphics, the hierarchy of the arts, Nietzsche's mirror, order, and disorder, will and idea, the ideas, and the PSR, clashing magisteria, experience, the failure, the amazing Pythagoreans, the origin of painting, the ancient division, the first scientist, the will to power, Poiesis, the source, access to excess, respite, and salvation, theory of mind, angels, and aliens, Mount Hermon, the supreme, art, the shadow. The reproach, soul music, good, and bad music, good music. The muse is death, and circles, conclusion. Mind music. Without music, life would be a mistake. Friedrich Nietzsche. As the mind, the ultimate musical instrument. Is the world a unique symphony composed by the world mind, a symphony so extraordinary that it has been rendered physical, available to all of our senses, and not just to our ears? Are atoms actually physical notes? Chemistry's periodic table would then be a musical scale of the elements, and the laws of ontological music would determine what and how the elements can combine. Is the material world actually music that is enormously slowed down or frozen? Is it just low-frequency music, inaudible to our ears and for sound? Are quantum mechanical wave functions really musical functions, made of countless blended notes? They play music all the time, but our ears aren't attuned to this kind of music. Imagine the most special of pianos. This exceptional piano has been reduced to nothing but a keyboard one that can play any possible note. The keys of this piano are eternal. They have compulsory existence. They are the very foundation of existence. In fact, they are the only things that have being, i.e., fundamental reality. This piano wouldn't be of much use if it had no one to play it. Well then, who does play it? If we were the philosopher Plato, we would say that a cosmic being, the demiurge, is the piano player. But then we have to explain the existence of the demiurge as well as that of the piano, and we have thereby created a problematic dualism. There are two types of things in this system, the piano and the piano player. Do we actually need an external being, an external player? Why can't the system operate on its own? There's nothing to stop the piano playing itself. Such a thing already exists. It's called a pianola. A pianola is a mechanical piano that uses a roll of perforated paper to operate its keys, hence can dispense with the services of an external pianist. The type of piano we are contemplating in our thought experiment is much more sophisticated than a mechanical piano. It's a living piano. It spontaneously, automatically, naturally, habitually plays itself, and it is actually trying to understand itself via the music it plays. After all, its music is all it has with which to comprehend itself. Music is its only output. The living piano experiences its own music. It feels pleasure when it plays well and pain when it plays badly. It tries to make more and more of the music it likes and to get rid of all the music it doesn't like. It learns from its mistakes. It learns what it likes and wants more of, and equally what it dislikes and wants less of. It thereby takes on a character, a distinct way of doing things, a clear pattern of behavior, a personality. Every such piano is different. These pianos all develop differently. Each piano is unique, playing its own unique songs, its own soul music. Imagine a whole world of these pianos, a world comprised only of these pianos. There is literally nothing else. Each is a self-playing piano, playing its own compositions. Let's imagine that none of these living pianos can hear the work of any other piano. Each piano is on its own, playing its own music and learning strictly from its own work. Each is a private music domain. If one of these living pianos is going to become a better musician, it will have to do it all by itself. Some might learn fast. However, we can imagine that many pianos will take an age to learn how to properly play themselves to produce the results they really want. Getting good at anything is hard work, and hard work for most creatures is painful. They avoid it. The path of least resistance is the path most creatures like to take. Now imagine an alternative scenario. Imagine that all these different pianos can in fact listen to each other, can play together, can create joint compositions, can learn from each other, copy each other, collaborate with each other. We now have two interacting systems, a private domain and a public domain. In the private domain, each piano does its own thing. It plays its own music, hears its own music, learns from its own music, and tries to make its own music better. It dreams, of course, of producing the perfect music that will be so good that it will make it feel like a god and explain its own existence to itself. But this private domain offers such slow progress. There's no multiplier factor to speed things up. It's all down to the individual and how fast, or otherwise, the individual is at learning. In the public domain, by contrast, all the pianos are playing together. They can all hear each other. They can all hear plenty of what works and what doesn't, and they can rapidly learn from each other. They can hear and create vastly more and grander music than they could ever have composed on their own. Think of the difference between a soloist, no matter how brilliant, and an enormous orchestra full of every possible instrument and expertise. Even the finest soloist will want to be informed by others. It will make the soloist shine all the more brightly. In this public domain, progress is potentially much, much faster than in the private domain, since every player is exposed to much more music, and to many more musical influences, possibilities, and experiments. Yet the public domain has its own drawbacks. There's a drastic danger of discord. All of the pianos might play out of tune, disharmoniously, discordantly. Everything might clash. This could be the worst music ever. Or perhaps the public system will produce a lowest common denominator music bland, dull, banal, unadventurous, average, merely competent, but with none of the great virtuoso potential of music ever coming to fruition. Or perhaps the public system will generate competing music to rival orchestras, let's say, playing two totally different symphonies. Each individual piano will have to choose which collective orchestra it joins, which symphony it signs up to. If it joins one orchestra, it's out of tune with the other, in conflict with the other, and causing pain and even hatred amongst the pianos playing the rival symphony. Or perhaps the public system produces a totalitarian, authoritarian music with which everyone has to join in or face ostracism. Or perhaps the public system is taken over by a small, dominant elite, and everyone else has to dance to their tune and fit in with their music, whether they like it or not. So the public domain, although it offers the chance to make speedy progress, also offers the potential for conflict and disharmony on a truly grand scale, and thus for much slower progress. The pain in the public domain can be much worse than it is in the private domain. How can the public music possibly get better given how much conflict is likely? How can the collective music be optimized? It would require some methodical process to slowly push it towards the perfection it contains within it, waiting to be released. What would such a process be? A process to take us from total public discord to total public harmony. How about the dialectic? We start with one song, the thesis. Some pianos like this and join in with it to amplify it. Other pianos don't like it and play a song with opposite properties, the antithesis. A bitter musical war breaks out between the two competing songs. Each tries to drown out the other. Gradually, other, neutral pianos see virtues in each of the two rival songs and compose a new song, combining elements of both. This is the synthesis song. Yet it also functions as a new thesis, higher than the previous starting thesis because it contains elements of its rival. However, like any thesis, it generates an antithesis, and thus the process is repeated all over again. A new synthesis is required, which, again, will raise the thesis song to a higher level. So, all of the pianos go through this long and laborious yet also fascinating and creative dialectical process until there is a grand synthesis of 100% of the pianos. They have all arrived at the absolute synthesis, the song that every piano regards as perfect. This is the music of the spheres, the music of the gods themselves. You have to be a god to play it, hear it, and appreciate it. Musically, the Big Bang is an event of total musical chaos when the public space is first created and all the different pianos discordantly play their own private tunes, with no regard to any other piano. This is absolute musical entropy, song entropy at its maximum. After a while, perhaps an age, the first discernible collective song appears from the chaos, the thesis song, the first public song, and this sets in motion the musical dialectic, which finally concludes with the absolute song, the final, perfect song. At that point, the musical universe has come to an end. It has played itself out. There are no more songs to be created. It either plays the absolute song forevermore, or it starts all over again. What we have described is, as it turns out, a musical version of reality itself. Simply replace the eternal pianos with eternal minds, and replace the piano keys with mathematical frequency sinusoids. What is a mind? It's a complete electromagnetic spectrum containing every possible frequency. It's an immaterial singularity. It's a frequency domain that performs ontological Fourier mathematics. Minds are self-thinking entities just as the pianos were self-playing instruments. They automatically think. It's their nature, their fundamental, essential activity. They think by a process no more onerous than putting together their eternal basis frequencies in various combinations, thus generating temporal and contingent thought functions just as pianos play combinations of keys. Each mind makes its own thought song, and likes it or dislikes it, and learns from it. All the different minds can also enter a public mind space and create collective thought functions. Their primary collective thought function is nothing less than the material world of space and time that we all inhabit. All of the minds that connect to this public world will either sing together, cooperate, or sing apart, compete. We therefore have the classic dialectical situation. All the different minds will clash over and over again until they achieve the perfect mental synthesis God. We live in a dialectical mathematical system of frequency waves, which are the essential components of living, striving minds seeking to perfect themselves. Music is an ideal analogy for this process, given how closely aligned with mathematics music is. Music might be regarded as a direct copy of mathematics, the continuation of mathematics by other means, by auditory, empirical means. With music, we can literally hear mathematical patterns. As Leibniz said so tellingly, music is the pleasure the human mind experiences from counting without being aware that it is counting. Music is the perfect metaphor for mathematics. If you find it hard to grasp reality in mathematical terms, you will find that you can make incredible progress by instead thinking of it in musical terms, and you will end up at more or less the same destination intuitively rather than analytically. Just think of musical compositions as mathematical wave functions. You can work out how reality works simply by contemplating the nature of music and how to arrive at the perfect collective music. As we have shown, the evolution of the musical universe exactly parallels the evolution of the mathematical universe, and is just an alternative way of thinking about the same thing without having to confront any difficult mathematics that may obstruct your ability to grasp the essentials of reality. If you find mathematics too daunting, use your superlative musical intuition instead. Just replace mathematical frequencies with musical notes. Just replace eternal basis sinusoids with eternal pure notes. Instead of individual monads, think of individual, self-playing pianos, violins, trumpets, guitars, drums, or whatever musical instrument you prefer to contemplate. Instead of the monadic collective, think of an orchestra. The members of the orchestra can play separately or together, and obviously the music is much more powerful when everyone is playing together, in harmony, in a single symphony with a common objective and just one conductor. Imagine the musical world that is created by the orchestra all playing together, and then imagine members of the orchestra doing solos and adding to the grand symphony, adding their own features to the public world. Imagine musical discord as a measure of mathematical entropy disorder, and musical harmony as a measure of mathematical negentropy order. The perfect state both mathematically and musically is zero entropy, absolute unity, interconnectedness, wholeness, completeness, symmetry. The universe is a collective mathematical composition, and we are all solo artists adding our own individual contributions via our free will, our self-determined actions. Our collective entropy goes down the more we cooperate and harmonize, and goes up the more we compete and engage in libertarianism, anomie, anarchy, and extreme individualism, i.e., discordianism. Selfish individualists are discordants, while altruistic collectivists are concordants. The former want to play their own songs, no matter how bad and how out of tune they are with everyone else. The metaphysics of music provides a rather painless way of understanding the metaphysics of existence itself. Pythagoras spoke of the gods designing the cosmos so that it would play the most sublime music, the music of the spheres, the divine music that can be heard everywhere in the cosmos by those with the ears to hear. When the gods configured reality mathematically, that necessarily meant musically too. The better the mathematics, the better the music. The best songs always reflect key mathematical features and properties, but the gods are no different from anyone or anything else. They too are mathematical musical organisms, wave-based monadic minds playing the grand music of mathematics. Music is about making auditory patterns, and mathematics is about making all possible patterns. Existence is mathematical music frequencies, and all of us are the instruments playing the cosmic symphony. Our task is simple: to arrive not at any old music, but the finest music that can possibly be played. The ideal music is reached when every player is in perfect harmony with every other player, and not a single discordant note is played. The orchestra is as one, and there are no disruptive soloists trying to play their own song. It takes the lifetime of the universe to arrive at this perfect music. Every disruptive soloist has to be brought into the collective orchestra. Who is the devil? He's the final holdout, the last player to be integrated into the orchestra. Who is the conductor of the orchestra? It's Abraxas, the first god, the first to play a tuneful song and recruit others to the song. Whose side are you on? That of the devil or Abraxas? N. The Metaphysics of Music. Arthur Schopenhauer, 22 February 1788, 21 September 1860, was a German philosopher. He is best known for his 1818 work The World as Will and Representation, wherein he characterizes the phenomenal world as the product of a blind and insatiable metaphysical will. Building on the transcendental idealism of Immanuel Kant, Schopenhauer developed an atheistic metaphysical and ethical system that rejected the contemporaneous ideas of German idealism. He was among the first thinkers in Western philosophy to share and affirm significant tenets of Eastern philosophy, such as asceticism and the notion of the world as appearance. His work has been described as an exemplary manifestation of philosophical pessimism. Schopenhauer deemed music a timeless, universal language comprehended everywhere, which actually embodied the will itself. Wikipedia. No philosopher has given music such a place of prominence in his metaphysics as Schopenhauer. He believed that the will, the key element in his metaphysics, was embodied in two different ways: by nature the world as idea, the represented world, and by music the world not as idea, the unrepresented world. For the world as idea, Schopenhauer turned to Plato's idea as forms, cosmic archetypes, to explain his system. However, right alongside conventional Platonist philosophy, he gave equal ranking to music, which he regarded as the supreme art. Many artists, most notably Wagner, consequently fell under the spell of Schopenhauer's philosophy. Nietzsche, as a young man, also succumbed to Schopenhauer's ideas, later proposing will to power rather than will to live as the basis of his own philosophy. Nietzsche too accorded music an extremely high philosophical rank. For Plato, ideas were eternal, immutable, and perfect. The intellect apprehended them given that they themselves were the basis of intellect. Music, however, did not belong to the ideas. Music is temporal and mutable, and is apprehended above all by the emotions. The ideas require only a mind. Music, of necessity, requires ears and a body capable of feelings in order to be moved by the music. The will generates two worlds, one visual and one audible. Through visual art such as sculpture and painting, we can reproduce the visual world. Through music, we can reproduce the audible world. Music and nature, Schopenhauer believed, share certain parallel features. He wrote, in the deepest notes of the harmony in the ground bass, the will begins to objectify itself. I recognize the mass of the planet and inorganic nature. This is a critical notion. For any system of idealism predicated on mind as the primary, foundational reality, the apparent existence of matter has to be accounted for. In Schopenhauer's philosophy, mind the will undergoes a process of objectifying itself, and it does so in definite grades. The lowest grades correspond to basic matter. As the grades rise, simple bodies are produced, then complex bodies such as those of humans, where the will is able to express itself consciously. The wide range of music is able to track these various material gradations, and the increasing ability of the will to manifest itself more individually and intentionally, culminating in human consciousness, the highest expression of will in Schopenhauer's system. Schopenhauer wrote, all the higher notes, easily mobile and sounding more quickly, are to be understood as emerging from the repercussions of the deep notes of the ground bass. This is to be understood as parallel to the fact that all bodies and organizations of nature must be viewed as arising through the development of the substance of the planet, step by step, as its bearer, so its source, and the same relationship can be established between the higher notes and the bass notes. And further, in all the array of steps that follow the rapino voices which produce a harmony between the bass and the leading voice which carries the melody, I recognize the full series of ideas in which the will objectifies itself. Those which stand closer to the bass are the first such steps, which are not yet organic, but are in a multiplicity of external forms. The higher notes represent to me the world of plants and animals. And lastly, in the melody, in the high, singing, integral principal voice, which reflects an uninterrupted, meaningful connection of a thought progressing from the beginning to the end, I recognize the highest stage of objectification of the will, the contemplative life and strivings of the human. Since the structures of nature and music run in parallel, humans can, through music, conjure nature in a second way for our ears rather than our eyes, for our emotions rather than our reason. Music possesses people in a way reason never does. Schopenhauer thought he understood why this should be the case. He saw the will in itself as ferociously irrational, and therefore reason could never convey its nature. Music, by contrast, bypassed reason and therefore got closer to the will's true nature. Exactly because of that, it could move us more than anything else. It revealed in the core of our being the true inner workings of reality. It linked us better than anything else to the source, to reality in itself. It set up a resonance between us and the fundamental pulse of life, the non-phenomenon. In Schopenhauer's philosophy, all phenomena, i.e., things which are seen in the material world of the senses, are derived from Plato's ideas. Since music does not originate in Plato's ideas, hence has no appearance, it cannot be a phenomenon in the strict sense. The word phenomenon is derived from the ancient Greek phainomon, thing appearing to view, that which appears or is seen. For Schopenhauer, music was a direct copy of the will itself, able to touch the essence of the inner world in our deepest self. However, the will exists outside space and time, whereas music happens in space and time, exactly where material phenomena occur, so music would then have to be considered as some intermediate species between immaterial noumena and material phenomena. It constitutes, we might say, a nomenon conditioned by phenomenal space and time frame, all phenomena in the material world of the senses. It isn't phenomenon, but it is certainly informed by phenomenal reality. Schopenhauer wrote music, since it passes over the ideas, is also quite independent of the phenomenal world, positively ignores it, and to a certain extent could still exist even if there were no world at all, which cannot be said of the other arts. This can't be strictly true. What would music be without space and time? Space and time belong to material phenomenal reality, not to immaterial noumenal reality. So, although music doesn't come from the ideas, it nevertheless needs the phenomenal world, or at least space and time. If it didn't, it would be pure will itself, and not a copy or modification of the will. Perhaps we might say that we could imagine the space-time world being populated by music rather than matter, by musical compositions rather than material objects. All the other arts are about the imitation of the material world of visible objects. Plato's ideas pre-exist the material, phenomenal world and serve as its design archetypes. They are not in space and time. Music in itself prior to its expression in space and time seems, for Schopenhauer, to stand alongside the ideas and independently of them. It's an emotional counterpart to the intellectual ideas. The ideas are realized phenomenally through space and time, but do not need space and time in order to exist. The same, in Schopenhauer's scheme, would appear to be true of music. Music has its own existence, but becomes manifest only when space and time operate on it. It appears to the ears, as opposed to the eyes. Schopenhauer said, thus, music is as immediate an objectification and copy of the whole will as the world itself is, indeed, as the ideas are, the multiplied phenomenon of which constitutes the world of individual things. Therefore music is by no means like the other arts, namely a copy of the ideas, but a copy of the will itself, the objectivity of which are the ideas. For this reason the effect of music is so very much more powerful and penetrating than is that of the other arts, for these others speak only of the shadow, but music of the essence. All of Schopenhauer's claims regarding the power of music revolve around the notion that music is as real as Plato's ideas and has the same rank of importance. If the ideas produce the observed world of things, music produces an unobserved world of compositions, which the greatest composers can most brilliantly reflect. In these terms, composers are not so much producing music as channeling or transmitting pre-existing musical structures. The more the music moves us, the more it has captured the musical archetypes. For Plato, ultimate reality comprised perfect, immutable, eternal forms, ideas capped by the form of the good capable of being apprehended by the intellect. For Schopenhauer, ultimate reality comprised total subjectivity, the will which could objectify itself in two first-order ways, as Plato's ideas for the intellect and as music for the emotions. From Plato's ideas, the visible world of matter-nature is born. We can regard the ideas as the world in itself, prior to the world being phenomenally manifested. From music, the audible world is born. We can regard music as the musical world in itself, before any particular music is born. The entire world of music is already implicit in the kernel of eternal music. The type of music Schopenhauer most admired was that which sought to capture eternal music as complete universality, stripped of all particularity. To contemplate Plato's ideas, the universals of the intellect, is to escape from particular phenomena and reach each eternal idea in itself. What Schopenhauer did was place music on the same footing as Plato's ideas. He conceived an effect of eternal, universal, immutable, perfect notes, melodies, harmonies, compositions, symphonies, and so on. The best music humans generate is that which best reflects eternal music, the music of the spheres, we might say. The worst music, by contrast, is highly particular, trivial, of its time, and it in no way captures the soul, the kernel of music, which is reflective of the deepest metaphysics, and as close to reality in itself as we can get. Most pop music is instantly forgettable. Only a tiny number of songs out of the vast musical output of the world endure. They have transcended their particular time and touched something deep and raw, some primordial power. They have a numinous quality. In a real sense, they are awesome. That's why the very greatest musicians can hold so many people spellbound. They are sorcerers. The palette of sounds. Lais wrote, according to Schopenhauer, the whole palette of sounds corresponds to the levels of the will's objectification. He sets up the correspondence between the pitches of the voice and the hierarchy in nature. Bass corresponds to inorganic nature, which is the foundation of the higher forms of nature. The highest voice Schopenhauer perceives to be the main one. It is the highest level of the will's objectification, the sensible being, which is the sphere of every living thing. The unity of the voices in their development is a melody, which is understood by the philosopher as a process of the expression of the will. A melody reveals the underlying passions of the human soul. It becomes possible due to the universal language of music, which operates with sound images, but not with concepts. The universality of the musical language means that it can utter any expressions of the will, become an accompaniment of every expression of its embodiment. For this reason, the world is embodied music, and thus embodied will. Music, which accompanies every event, intensifies every event's meaning due to the accordance to the inner essence of the phenomenon. Imagine the world as a soundscape rather than a sightscape. Imagine matter as bass notes. The more that mind is expressed, the higher the notes get. Human consciousness is associated with very high notes. In brainwave theory, consciousness is associated with high-frequency beta waves, while the unconscious concerns lower frequency waves, alpha, theta, and delta waves. If we went below the unconscious, we would encounter matter, which, we might say, is actually the deepest unconscious. Jung's psychoid concept is relevant. Jung wrote, since psyche and matter are contained in one and the same world, and moreover are in continuous contact with one another and ultimately rest on irrepresentable, transcendental factors, it is not only possible, but fairly probable even, that psyche and matter are two different aspects of one and the same thing. The archetypes constitute the structure of the collective unconscious. The latter represents the psyche that is identical in all individuals. It cannot be directly perceived or represented, in contrast to the perceptible psychic phenomena, and on account of its irrepresentable nature I have called it psychoid. No psychic quality in the proper sense of the word is implied, but only a quasi-psychic one such as the reflex processes possess. Wikipedia says, in later years Jung revised and brought in the concept of archetypes even further, conceiving of them as psychophysical patterns existing in the universe, given specific expression by human consciousness and culture. Jung proposed that the archetype had a dual nature. It exists both in the psyche and in the world at large. He called this non-psychic aspect of the archetype psychoid. Jung originally thought of the archetypes as nominal mental functions that had phenomenal effects on the human mind. In Schopenhauer's philosophy, which had a strong influence on Jung, the nominal will is never encountered in itself, but its phenomenal objectification is. Schopenhauer's will could be described as psychoid in Jung's terms, since in its own terms it is irrepresentable, and it accounts for both the worlds of psyche and matter. It is the tertium quid third thing underlying and responsible for both. It is the Jungian unius mundus one world, the unified reality outside space and time from which everything emerges and to which everything returns. Wikipedia says, it was the psychoid aspect of the archetype that so impressed Nobel laureate physicist Wolfgang Pauli. Embracing Jung's concept, Pauli believed that the archetype provided a link between physical events and the mind of the scientist who studied them. In doing so, he echoed the position adopted by German astronomer Johannes Kepler. Thus the archetypes that ordered our perceptions and ideas are themselves the product of an objective order that transcends both the human mind and the external world. We can imagine transcendental components of the human mind that determine how each human perceives reality. Jung in effect imagined transcendental components of a collective mind determining how reality is perceived by each individual mind, each of which is inherently linked to the collective mind. In other words, Jung created a level above the individual Kantian mind, the level of the collective mind. This is a much more logical idea. We can then identify the collective mind with God, or Plato's demiurge. In ontological mathematics, reality comprises a system of individual sinusoidal monadic minds, forming a collective hive mind. From their own sinusoidal content, all these monadic minds build the objective world. Sinusoids could therefore be interpreted in psychoid terms. They are responsible for both mind and matter. They are built into minds, and minds then use them to create matter. Wolfgang Pauli would have been all over ontological mathematics. It does. Exactly what Pauli was looking for. It directly links physical things and events to the minds that study them. In fact, minds are the authors of these things and events. The world is a collective mental construct, and only seems not to be so because we typically associate mind with our own actions and our own individual body. The average person never imagines that the universe is simply a collective mental entity, and that the resistance and objectivity of so-called matter is the resistance and objectivity of all the other minds in existence. The average human mind perceives reality systemically wrong-lie, which is why empiricism, based on perception, is so misleading and dangerous. The average person imagines the material world as one thing and individual minds as something else. It never occurs to them that the material world is a construct of mind, created by the collective mind, and thus obeys mental principles. This is an idea almost impossible for a sensory empiricist to grasp. For each of us, only two things really exist, our own mind, and the mind of everyone else, the rest of the universe. Each of us creates an individual material world in our private dreams. When we all dream together, we create a single, objective, material dream world which we all experience. We do not refer to it as a dream world, we leave out the dream qualifier. Yet that's exactly what it is. To be exact, it's a collective dream rather than an individual dream, a public dream rather than a private dream. In a private dream, we can alter the dream as we go along. It's highly fluid. That's because only our mind is involved with its construction. We don't have to ask anyone else's permission to change anything. The private dream world changes every time we dream. We don't keep going back to the same dream world every time we fall asleep. Can you imagine how our reality would change if we did? Our private dream world would be just as real as our waking reality. By contrast, we experience the collective dream as something we can't change as we wish. It's something that stays more or less the same every time we wake up, something that opposes our will, as opposed to bending to our will. That makes the average person think that dreams and the universe are two totally different things. Scientists come along and say that our dreams are just random mental activity, while the universe is made of something called matter, which, they tell us, is true reality, and which actually makes mind in some unexplained way. In fact, what scientists call matter is just collective thought rather than individual thought. It's exactly because matter is collective that it opposes our will. We are up against every other mind in existence. Matter is made of mathematical sinusoidal waves. That's why the scientific study of matter is all about mathematics, and why quantum mechanics concerns mathematical wave functions. Scientists are unable to grasp that reality originates in sinusoidal, mathematical minds, and hence that mathematics is literally everywhere. They cannot grasp that mathematics is all about mind, not matter in the scientific sense. Mental mathematics generates the physical world. For scientists, mathematics is just some weird, unreal, man-made abstraction that, for some unaccountable reason, is perfectly designed for revealing reality to us. Not once has any scientist ever explained why mathematics has any connection to science if science is supposedly about reality and mathematics is supposedly unreal. It is literally a category error for science to use mathematics and still claim to be about reality if what it claims about mathematics is actually true, which it isn't. Union analyst Anne Belford Ulanov wrote, "Psychoid refers to unconscious processes that are unrepresentable in word or image. It is this unrepresentable level of the unconscious processes. Jung would say the archetype, for example, is of a psychoid nature, meaning by that you don't experience it directly. You experience it through derivatives. An emotion will grip you, a behavior will possess you or compel you. Images would arise or attract you. Music too is unrepresentable in word or image and is highly archetypal, hence is psychoid. In Schopenhauer's terms, music is in some way connected to the material universe. It tracks it, it parallels it, it expresses it in terms of bass notes. Jung's whole system of the collective unconscious archetypes and the notion of the psychoid is highly reminiscent of Schopenhauer's system, and also that of Eduard von Hartmann, who tried to unify the philosophies of Schopenhauer core irrationalism and Hegel core rationalism. Von Hartmann's key text was called Philosophy of the Unconscious. Wikipedia says the unconscious is both will and reason, the latter concept also interpreted as idea, and the absolute all-embracing ground of all existence. It's amazing how von Hartmann, a critical figure in Lincoln Kent, Schopenhauer, and Hegel to Freud, Jung, and modern psychology is practically unknown today, even though he was famous in his own day. He needs to be rediscovered by the intellectual community. His work can easily be repurposed to accommodate ontological mathematics. His system, intertwining reason and will, is perfect for describing logos and mythos, syntax and semantics, form and content. It paved the way for Nietzsche's description of the world in terms of the gods Apollo reason and Dionysus will. Music can stand for Dionysus emotion, desire, will, and Plato's ideas for Apollo intellect. It's useful to consider music in relation to the tripartite Platonic soul. Wikipedia says the Platonic soul consists of three parts: 1, the logos, or logistic and logical, mind, nous, or reason; 2, the thymos, or thumatic and emotion, spiritedness, or masculine; and 3, the eros, or epithumatic and appetitive, desire, or feminine. The three parts are located in different homes in the body. 1, logos, is located in the head. It concerns reason and regulates the other parts. 2, thymos, is located in the heart, and it concerns spirit, pride, anger, and feelings. And 3, eros, is located in the gut and genitals and is related to desires, appetites, lusts, cravings, and instinctual drives. We can assign Apollo to the head and Dionysus to the heart, gut, and genitals. However, the eyes and ears in the head also link directly to Dionysus. He loves to look and to hear, to watch and listen. Sights and sounds inflame his passions. In Schopenhauer's system, we might infer that the highest frequency music is associated with the head, with logos. Mid-frequencies are associated with the heart, with thymos. Low frequencies are associated with the gut and genitals, with eros. Below, that is gross matter. Most people are low and mid-frequency people, more like animals than humans. Only the highly conscious or high-frequency, rational types, firmly in beta-wave consciousness. They are becoming angels, and beyond that, gods. The gods are ultra-high frequency beings. Ultra-high frequency notes cannot be heard. They belong to the music of the spheres, inaudible to mortal ears. I. Painting and sounds. S. Music, painting and sounds. Is architecture frozen music? When music is slowed down enough, and given enough of a bass, does it become matter? Can sound solidify? Schopenhauer said, music speaks not of things, but of pure weal and woe, which are the only realities for the will. That is why it speaks so much to the heart, while it is nothing to say directly to the head. For expression of the passions is one thing, depiction of things another. Schopenhauer found all pictorial music objectionable. Such music was trying to partake of Plato's ideas and be intellectual, exactly what music should never attempt, in Schopenhauer's view. Why has modern art gone so badly wrong? It's because it no longer deals with beauty but with conceptualism. It's trying to be a kind of philosophy, social criticism, a commentary on everyday life. But that's not art, that's bad intellectualism. Modern art is committing a category error. It's unfit for purpose. It has ceased to fulfill the function that gave it such prestige in the first place. Does any work in a modern art gallery prompt anything other than a snigger, or a gasp of disbelief at the sheer awfulness of it from you? Come on, be honest now. When you see the Sistine Chapel for real, you gasp in admiration. When you see modern art, your breath is taken away by the sheer scale of the fraud being perpetuated. Art is now anti-art, which still thinks it's art. S. The general root. Schopenhauer observed as an elementary condition that to employ the principle of sufficient reason, we must think about something specific that stands in need of explanation. This indicated to him that at the root of our epistemological situation, we must assume the presence of a subject that thinks about some object to be explained. From this, he concluded that the general root of the principle of sufficient reason is the distinction between subject and object that must be presupposed as a condition for the very enterprise of looking for explanations and as a condition for knowledge in general. In sum, he identifies the general root of the principle of sufficient reason as the subject-to-object distinction in conjunction with the thought of necessary connection. Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Schopenhauer's argument is a fantastically important one, and routinely overlooked. As soon as we commence any epistemological exercise, any pursuit of knowledge, we automatically assume two things: one, ourself, as the thinking subject engaged in an inquiry, and two, an object into which we are inquiring. In other words, we apply a universal subject-to-object distinction. However, Schopenhauer has already gone too far. It turns out that the first thing we should inquire into is how subjectivity itself is possible, and what it is ontologically, because without the subject, no other process of knowledge acquisition can ever occur. In other words, we have to consider the subject itself as an object to be explained. Schopenhauer's system is based on a refusal to analyze the subject as an object. He wants it to be an unknowable thing in itself, prior to any objectification. For Schopenhauer, only objects produced by the subject, hence of a different category from the subject, the producer, itself can be known. He cannot accept that the subject can also be an object when it reflects on itself. In ontological mathematics, the ultimate existence are subjects' monadic minds. They are defined by a precise mathematical formula, and made from a full-spectrum collection of a precise mathematical entity, namely the sinusoidal wave. However, although each monad is a subject to itself, it's an object to every other monad, and indeed it's an object to itself when it ponders its own existence as something in the world, as part of the overall system. Ontological mathematics is a system of subject-to-objects that create an objective reality, the universe, with which they all subjectively interact and experience, and with which they also objectively interact via the physical body they control, which is part of physical reality. H. The poles. Materialism, even at its birth, has death in its heart because it ignores the subject and the forms of knowledge which are presupposed, just as much in the case of the crudest matter from which it desires to start, as in that of the organism at which it desires to arrive. For no object without a subject is the principle which renders all materialism forever impossible. The objective world, the world as idea, is not the only side of the world, but merely its outward side, and it has an entirely different side, the side of its inmost nature, its kernel, the thing in itself. But the world as idea only appears with the opening of the first eye. Without this medium of knowledge it cannot be, and therefore it was not before it. But without that eye, that is to say, outside of knowledge, there was also no before, no time. Thus time has no beginning, but all beginning is in time. Accordingly, the past out of which the first present arises is, like it, dependent upon the knowing subject, without which it is nothing. Schopenhauer. Has any materialist ever refuted the fundamental principle of idealism? No object without a subject. If this principle is true, matter the object cannot exist without mind the subject, for which matter is the object. Materialism's fundamental principle is objects only. In materialism, material objects are all that exist, and they are completely under the control of the laws of matter.
Accordingly, things such as life, mind, subjectivity, qualia, free will, the unconscious, and consciousness can only be weird illusions, epiphenomena, or emergent phenomena.
They can have no inherent reality. These things can have no causal power, because all causal power in materialism lies with lifeless, mindless, purposeless, unfree, material atoms, and the laws of lifeless, mindless, purposeless, unfree, material atoms. Doesn't the Big Bang prove once and for all that the world of objects came from a universal subject to cosmic mind, an immaterial singularity? To avoid that inevitable conclusion which validates idealism and invalidates materialism, scientific materialists claim that the world of objects is not preceded by any subjective mind, but instead randomly jumps out of non-existence for no reason, by no mechanism, to no purpose. The universe of objects, randomly generated, then bizarrely creates pointless, powerless, subjective minds, although no explanation has ever been offered as to why objects have any need, or indeed any capacity, to create subjects. Everything in the material world could happen just as well without subjects, given that subjective minds have no causal power, hence can't change a single thing. Given that subjective minds do not, in materialism, have any point or function, they are entirely redundant. By Occam's razor, nature never does anything superfluously, hence the very existence of subjective minds is a logical falsification of materialism. However, scientists never accept logic and the principle of sufficient reason as a legitimate basis for falsification. It's logically impossible for objects to create subjects, i.e., it's impossible for materialism to be true. The reverse is not the case. The fundamental activity of subjects is to create objects and thoughts to perceive and contemplate. That's what minds do, they think. Thinking is a creative process. Thinking creates objects of thought. Thoughts themselves are objects of thinking. The simplest evidence of the object-making action of mind is that our minds create dream worlds every time we go to sleep, i.e., our thoughts generate what our minds take to be matter. Any dreamer is 100% convinced of the authenticity and reality of such dream worlds every bit as much as waking people are of the real world. Therefore, we know as a 100% empirical fact that the mind creates material objects and worlds from its own thoughts and fully accepts the reality of these. If that's true of dreams, why shouldn't it be true of the real world too? After all, how can we have a substance dualism of dreams and reality? Isn't it much more rational and in full accordance with Occam's razor to conclude that our private dreams are of exactly the same nature as the real world? They differ only in degree, not in kind. In a particular dream, one mind produces one subjective dream world. When all minds dream together, they produce one objective dream world. However, exactly because it's objective and common to all minds, they don't call it a dream world, they call it reality. Idealism is true. Materialism is false and makes no sense. Materialism is logically impossible and incoherent. Occam's razor and the principle of sufficient reason definitively refute materialism. The primary thing humanity has to explain is mind, that by which we know and perceive anything, not matter, that which we perceive. Without mind, no one would know that matter even existed. In fact, given the truth of idealism, matter cannot exist at all without mind to make it. Christopher Janaway wrote, "The argument for idealism, which Schopenhauer most relies on, rests on the concept subject and object. The subject is that which knows or experiences, the object that which is known or experienced. The world of representation, for Schopenhauer, requires both. He makes two large claims. First, that nothing can be both object and subject. Secondly, that there can never be a subject without an object, or an object without a subject. It is the last point which he takes to establish idealism, and indeed to make it something obvious. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy says, for Schopenhauer, the world we experience is constituted by objectifications of will that correspond first to the general root of the principle of sufficient reason, and second to the more specific fourfold root of the principle of sufficient reason. This generates initially a two-tiered outlook, viz. Will equals reality versus objects in general equals appearance, that articulates into a three-tiered outlook, viz. Will equals reality vs. universal, non-spatiotemporal objects versus individual spatio-temporal objects, by further distinguishing between universalistic and individualistic levels within the sphere of objects. According to Schopenhauer, corresponding to the level of the universal subject-object distinction, will is immediately objectified into a set of universal objects or Platonic ideas. These constitute the timeless patterns for each of the individual things that we experience in space and time. So, for Schopenhauer, the will is pure subject, a universal subject, and it must create objects for itself, since that's what subjects inherently do. The first objects it must generate are universal objects, Plato's ideas, which then determined serve as the design templates for all particular objects. Plato's ideas belong to the objective pole of existence. The will belongs to the subjective pole. Schopenhauer's system begins with a universal subject, which generates a conceptual universal object, Plato's hierarchy of ideas, which generates a perceptual universal object, the cosmos, which is full of particular things, individuated things in space and time. Amongst these are 1. Inorganic things, which can neither perceive nor conceive, nor manifest life. 2. Plants, which can neither perceive nor conceive, but can manifest life. 3. Animals, which can perceive but not conceive. And 4. Human beings, which can both perceive and conceive. The only things that could possibly be above humans are entities that perceive and conceive better than humans do, i.e., they are more conscious than humans. In Schopenhauer's system, the Platonic ideas are the immediate objectification of the will, whereas spatio-temporal objects are secondary objectifications. In Neoplatonism, the one, the source, emanates the nous, the cosmic intellect, which emanates the psyche, the world soul, which emanates nature, the material world, and populates it with living individuals. In Schopenhauer's system, the will, the source, emanates Plato's hierarchy of ideas, the cosmic nous, which emanates the phenomenal universe of space, time, and matter, and populates it with living individuals. In ontological mathematics, the hive mind, consisting of mathematical monadic minds, is at 0 time t equals 0, a perfect singularity of zero entropy. Via the Big Bang, it creates the universe of space, time, and matter. This is a mathematical cosmic hologram inside the singularity mind, just as a dream world unfolds inside a mind and in no way breaks out of the mind. Monadic mind subjects then link to the hologram the common object, and they animate avatars' physical bodies, through which they directly experience the space-time universe. The task of these minds is to work out that they created the universe between themselves, and that they are also destined to bring it to an end. The end of the universe occurs when every mind in existence attains absolute knowledge of the true nature of existence. Every mind becomes God. What culmination of the universe could be better than that? It's the perfect end, hence the perfect beginning for the next Big Bang and the next universe. According to Schopenhauer, the visual and literary art scene is all about aesthetically capturing the Platonic ideas, thus giving us a way to grasp the foundations of the world of representation, the Maya universe of illusion that we all inhabit. What of music? Where does Schopenhauer locate music in his scheme? He doesn't derive music from Plato's ideas, the first level of objectification. This implies that music is either a different type of first level of objectification, on a par with the Platonic ideas but distinct from them, or music is even closer to the wool than the Platonic ideas are, i.e., it's more aligned with the subjective pole of the universal subject-to-object distinction, whereas Plato's ideas define the objective pole. When we access the Platonic ideas, we are encountering the first level of objectivity, but when we access music, we are encountering the level of subjectivity closest to the will itself. This makes music the most metaphysical art, i.e., closest to the inner kernel of things, and also the most subjective, internal, and feeling-centered art. Where the Platonic ideas constitute the patterns for the types of objects in the world, music duplicates the basic emotional and willing structure of the world, subjectively rather than objectively. Music therefore gets much more under our skin than any other art form. That's why music plays such a dominant role in life in comparison with the other arts, and why music stars are much more famous and revered than non-musical artists. Since the will expresses itself through music as well as ideas, Schopenhauer reasoned that analogies must exist between music and ideas. They were, he contended, two different perspectives on the same thing. Bass notes map to inorganic nature. Inanimate nature grounds and produces animate life. Harmonies map to the animal world. Melodies map to the human world. For Schopenhauer, it was as valid to explore the world aesthetically as it was scientifically. He wanted to cloak philosophy in an artistic, and especially musical, cloak. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy says, with respect to the theme of achieving more peaceful and transcendent states of mind, Schopenhauer believed that music achieves this by embodying the abstract forms of feelings, or feelings abstracted from their particular everyday circumstances. This allows us to perceive the essences of emotional life, sadness itself, joy itself, etc., without the contingent contents that would typically cause suffering. By expressing emotion in this detached way, music allows us to apprehend the nature of the world without the frustration involved in daily life, and hence, in a mode of aesthetic awareness akin to the tranquil philosophical contemplation of the world, music is kind of vaccine. It inoculates us against despair. It gives us a profound taste of emotion, but without the damaging effects of particular emotional trauma. It sublimates negative and harmful emotions. Wikipedia says, an inactivated vaccine or kill vaccine is a vaccine consisting of virus particles, bacteria, or other pathogens that have been grown in culture and then lose disease-producing capacity. If emotion is the disease, music is what protects us against the disease. It contains the disease but translates it into a form that not only does us no harm, but which actually inspires and elevates us. Universal feelings. Everything that lives is in flux. Everything that lives emits sound, but we only perceive a part of it. We do not hear the circulation of the blood, the growth and decay of our bodily tissue, the sound of our chemical processes, but our delicate organic cells, the fibers of brain and nerves and skin are impregnated with these inaudible sounds. They vibrate in response to their environment. This is the foundation of the power of music. We can set free these profound emotional vibrations. In order to do so, we employ musical instruments in which the decisive factor is their own inner sound potential. That is to say, what is decisive is not the strength of the sound or its tonal color, but its hidden character, the intensity with which its musical power affects the nerves. Music must elevate into human consciousness vibrations which are otherwise inaudible and unperceived, bring silence to life, uncover the hidden sound of silence. Kafka. Schopenhauer believed that music expresses universal feelings. He said it does not express this or that individual or particular joy, this or that sorrow or pain or horror or exultation or cheerfulness or peace of mind, but rather joy, sorrow, pain, horror, exultation, cheerfulness, and peace of mind as such in themselves, abstractly. He insisted that music gave us a profound pleasure that expressed the deepest recesses of our nature. Who can doubt that music takes us somewhere that nothing else can? Schopenhauer said, "When music suitable to any scene, action, event, or environment is played, it seems to disclose to us its most secret meaning, and appears to be the most accurate and distinct commentary on it." What great movie would be complete without a killer soundtrack? Many awesome movies would be eminently forgettable without their soundtrack. Many movies that could have been great failed to make the grade because they didn't get the music right. Imagine Psycho without the famous Psycho music. In fact, the first cut of the movie didn't have the music, and the test screenings were disastrous. The music saved the movie and made it one of the film classics. It's the music that makes a great movie, and the music that breaks it if the music goes wrong. A movie is all about the drama. Music increases the drama until we can hardly bear it. Music makes the movie unforgettable. Music elevates it and perfects it. What in our own lives benefit tremendously from being orchestrated? Everything would be better if we had a genius composer putting our lives to music. A brilliant music score could transform any of us into a god. Images alone don't draw us close enough to the characters, let's face it, the complete strangers that we meet on screen. For a movie to work, we need to empathize with the protagonists as rapidly as possible, in fact practically instantly. Music gives a rocket boost to our empathy. The music moves us and sets up a resonance between ourselves and the characters on screen. Our musical mirror neurons fire, and we start to feel what the characters feel. Both our sympathy and empathy are fully engaged. Instead of the movie characters being remote and disconnected from us, we are all of a sudden directly in their shoes, feeling what they're feeling and thinking what they're thinking. Most of the movies that fail not only have poor scripts and characters, but also poor soundtracks. Many great movies have made key soundtrack decisions and dropped commission material that wasn't hitting the spot. Choosing the right score is vital. Get the music wrong, and you get the emotional tone wrong. That can ruin everything. The soundtrack effect is profound. Schopenhauer said, to the man who gives himself up entirely to the impression of a symphony, it is as if he saw all the possible events of life and of the world passing by within himself. Music connects us emotionally to the archetypes of the collective unconscious. These archetypes control everything that can happen in the world until we develop the capacity to act without their help. D. Parsifal. Parsifal is an opera in 3 acts by German composer Richard Wagner. It is loosely based on Parzival by Wolfram von Eschenbach, a 13th century epic poem of the Arthurian knight Parzival and his quest for the Holy Grail. Wagner's spelling of Parsifal instead of the Parzival that he had used up to 1877 is informed by one of the theories about the name Percival, according to which it is of Arabic origin, Parsifal meaning pure or poor fool. Wikipedia. Oh, you know the tale. Amfortas, the Grail King, has a terrible wound. It doesn't kill him, but nor does it ever heal. The king lies suspended in a permanent state of mortal agony. He is truly the suffering king, yet he must continue to carry out his sacred duties. He must sullenly perform his religious rituals. Time and again, he is pushed to the limits of humiliation and mortification. Night after night of the Grail Order seeks to end their king's horror by venturing forth to recover the Spear of Destiny, the sacred object that alone can cure the tragic king, release him from his torment, and save the Order's honor. However, without exception, each knight succumbs to the Flower Maidens, the beautiful temptresses of Klingsor, the Black Magician who was the Order's great antagonist. They never return to the castle. They are lost forever. A prophecy says that redemption will come only at the hands of an innocent, a fool. Parsifal is a clueless young man. He is ignorant and has no compassion. He neglected his mother and allowed her to die. He has no idea who he really is or what his true origins are. He's an adventurer who kills merely for something to do. He does not seem like a suitable knight. When he arrives by chance at the Grail Castle, he has no understanding of what this place is. He is troubled by the plight of Amfortas, but he has no idea how to save him. He leaves the great castle, vainly hoping that something will turn up to allow him to return there as a hero. Like so many previous knights, he encounters one of Klingsor's temptresses. In fact, it's Kundry, the most seductive of them all. Derek Everett wrote, "In the domain of the Grail, this Kundry appears as a wild woman, an unkempt, shabby, and repulsive crone. On the other side of the mountains, however, in the magic garden of the sorcerer Klingsor, she appears as a beautiful maiden." In the 1865 prose draft, Wagner writes of an ancient curse without stating why Kundry had been cursed. Only in the second prose draft of 1877, after Wagner had been reading books about early Christianity, did he introduce the idea that Kundry had mocked Jesus and that he had cursed her, so that she now seeks Christ from world to world, tortured by unending existence. Kundry attempts to seduce Parsifal. Parsifal experiences an onslaught of sexual desire, but it actually causes him to transcend carnality and enter a state of profound realization. He understands exactly what has happened to Amfortas, and thus the true nature of the king's mysterious wound. He apprehends the suffering of the whole of mankind, and sees that the religious ceremony performed by Amfortas is intimately connected to humanity's pain and how to relieve it. With these spiritual insights, he is able to withstand Kundry's temptations, and to take the Spear of Destiny from Klingsor. Parsifal returns to the Grail Castle. He is now a true knight. In truth, he always was. His lineage is impeccable. He belongs to the Grail bloodline. He himself is the lost nephew of Amfortas and the king's rightful successor. He uses the tip of the spear to touch the grievous wound of Amfortas. It heals at once, releasing Amfortas from torment, from the sin that has haunted him his whole life. He was seduced by Kundry, the eternal seductress, became spiritually fallen, and consequently lost the spear of destiny to cleanse her. Freed of his disgrace, Amfortas can at last die. Parsifal takes over as the new Grail king and presides over a golden age for the Grail Order. The finest knights in the world join the order, which had previously been depleted, dishonored, and decaying. Parsifal renews the religious ceremonies that express the order's high purpose and brings immense spiritual healing to the world. The key intellectual experience of Wagner's career was encountering Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation. Arguably, Wagner was Schopenhauer's truest disciple. Nietzsche also fell under Schopenhauer's spell and became a starstruck member of Wagner's entourage, but later decisively rejected both Schopenhauer and Wagner. Wagner and Nietzsche took from Schopenhauer a picture of life as a constant conflict of competing wills and desires, which could be escaped only through disengagement and renunciation. Later, it reeked to Nietzsche of naked nihilism. Wagner in his earlier life was a kind of love and lighter, obsessed with redemption through unconditional love. Schopenhauer at least cured him of that. Under the power of Schopenhauer's misanthropy, Wagner reversed direction. He instead became obsessed with redemption through renunciation, especially renunciation of love. Love and sex were the agents of the reproduction of existential misery. To renounce love and sex was to bring the propagation of suffering to an end. Parsifal, a character who nauseated Nietzsche, was what Wagner aspired to be. Perhaps if Wagnerian music were played often enough, it would bring the love and light movement to an end. It would be a mercy killing. Amfortas yielded to the seductive beauty of Kundry. Parsifal was tempted but resisted. He did not succumb to carnal pleasure. His soul was pure. Parsifal alone was able to heal Amfortas and restore the damaged community of the Grail Knights. He raised them up once again to their former glory. Nietzsche dismissed Wagner as the apostle of chastity. He wrote Parsifal is a work of perfidy, of vindictiveness, of a secret attempt to poison the presuppositions of life, a bad work. The preaching of chastity remains an incitement to anti-nature. I despise everyone who does not experience Parsifal as an attempted assassination of basic ethics. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche satirized Wagner as an enfeebled old sorcerer. Nietzsche came to see Wagner's music as decadent and nihilistic. Instead of affirming life with all its sufferings, it sought to deaden the pain of existence. Nietzsche wrote of Parsifal, Richard Wagner, seemingly the all-conquering, actually a decaying, despairing romantic, suddenly sank down helpless and shattered before the Christian cross. As for Wagner, he believed that Nietzsche was mentally ill, and on one occasion wrote to Nietzsche's doctor suggesting that the young man's problem was caused by too much masturbation. Even worse, Nietzsche found out, archetypal power, or Schopenhauer, the visible world derives from Plato's ideas. All art, except music, is concerned with these archetypal ideas. Music bypasses the ideas and instead presents an alternative way of objectifying the will. Schopenhauer said, music is as immediate an objectification and copy of the whole will as the world itself is. Alongside a visible world of ideas, there is an invisible world of music, which the work of musicians makes audible to us. Music might be regarded as the interior of the exterior world. T. Christopher Janaway wrote, the will expresses once as the world of particular phenomena and universal kinds into which they fall. It expresses itself over again as music. Schopenhauer contends that the progression of musical notes through time is immediately understood by the human mind as the progress of our own inner strivings. Schopenhauer insisted that the highest music expressed impersonal, universal emotions rather than personal, particular emotions. Janaway wrote, Schopenhauer is proposing that in music we grasp directly and non-conceptually the essential shape, as it were, of feeling joy or sorrow, without any content, without any particular representation of what the emotion is about. Listeners thus recognize the pure ebb and flow of the will, of striving and satisfaction, in which their own life consists, but without their own desires being engaged, without feeling emotions themselves, and so without any risk of pain. For Schopenhauer, musical notes parallel the grades of the objectification of the will. Base notes are like in organic nature, the mass of the planet. They reflect the lowest grade of the will's objectification. Melody is analogous to the highest grade of the will's objectification, the intellectual life and endeavor of man. Everything in between reflects all the intermediate grades of the will's objectification involving cosmos, the inorganic world, the plant kingdom, and the animal kingdom. Music is a reiteration of the physical world in different terms. In Schopenhauer's system, you can recast physics musically. This is the ultimate string theory. The music of the spheres is literally encoded in the cosmos. Schopenhauer is the greatest philosopher of music, assigning it an importance equal to that of the cosmos itself. Musica universalis. He musica universalis is the universal music. The celestial bodies, in their carefully designed motions, create music, but it's inaudible to all but the gods, or the most discerning human ears, those of the highest and most mathematical philosophers, such as Pythagoras. Some said that humans couldn't hear the music of the spheres because it constituted a background noise that we had heard all our lives and screened out due to its familiarity. Aristotle said, since it appears unaccountable that we should not hear this music, they explain this by saying that the sound is in our ears from the very moment of birth, and is thus indistinguishable from its contrary silence, since sound and silence are discriminated by mutual contrast. What happens to men, then, is just what happens to coppersmiths, who are so accustomed to the noise of the smithy that it makes no difference to them. Mysterium cosmographicum. He mysterium cosmographicum is the mystery of the cosmos. The greatest mystery is why the human mind is so resistant to the idea of mathematics as the explanation of everything. Actually, it's not such a mystery. Humans privilege human languages over mathematics. After all, their thoughts are conducted in human language. Their consciousness is formed through human language. Mathematics seems alien, abstract, and highly unfamiliar. Humans believe in their senses. When they look out at the world, they don't see anything they regard as mathematics. They see something they call matter. The idea that this is actually mathematics, the appearance of mathematics in our world, to be more exact, is not a concept they can grasp. Moreover, humans are brainwashed at school to regard mathematics as unreal and abstract, while they are conditioned to think of science as dealing with the real and the concrete. Mathematics is dismissed as a mere tool used by scientists. Yes and no. The yes man versus the no man. Were you open to stuff or closed to stuff? Is this the era of positivity, the era of yes, where everyone is optimistic and says yes to life? Everything is open for business. All doors are open. In the game of snakes and ladders, people find only ladders. Or is this the era of negativity, the era of no, where everyone is pessimistic and says no to life? Everything is closed for business. All doors are shut. In the game of snakes and ladders, people find only snakes. Which religions say no to life? The most anti-life religion is Buddhism, which is why it is so admired by materialists, atheists, skeptics, nihilists, and scientists. Materialists see life merely as some weird epiphenomenon of non-life. They regard non-life as fundamental. There are so many negative people and so few positive people. The pessimists are currently beating the optimists in the war of imagining the future. That's why we need an optimistic new world order. The Dithyramb. Dithyramb is a wild choral hymn of ancient Greece, especially one dedicated to Dionysus. It can also mean a passionate or inflated speech poem, or prose. Nietzsche was the master of the modern dithyramb lacerating, intoxicated, incendiary Dionysian wisdom. The curiosity. Schopenhauer was brilliantly imaginative, but not the most consistent thinker. He argued that ultimate reality was the will, yet he also argued that the will was evil, and the best thing we could do was to cease to will. But how can we cease to will if will is the only thing that actually exists? How can existence carry out any operation to bring existence to an end? Existence is eternal and necessary. It reflects the laws of conservation of energy. It cannot be destroyed. Schopenhauer believed that the contemplation of Plato's ideas and slasher music allowed us to escape from the turbulent will and all of the temporal horrors it phenomenally generated. Yet the ideas and music are simply the first-order objectification of the will, meaning they are indissolubly linked to the will. If you actually could get rid of the will, you would thereby be getting rid of the ideas and music too, i.e., they are the will, just expressed at a less fundamental level than the will in itself. How can you escape from the will by contemplating things that are actually products of the will? Eduard von Hartmann improved Schopenhauer's system by combining its irrationalism with Hegelian rationalism. Encyclopedia Britannica says, Hartmann centered his system on the single phenomenon of the human unconscious, thought by him to evolve through 3 stages. In the first, called the unconscious, both reason and will, or rationalism and irrationalism, were united as an absolute, all-embracing spiritual principle underlying all existence. With the fall of man, reason and will were separated, and will, as blind impulse, began to determine the melancholy career of the unconscious. The second stage, called cosmic, began with the origin of conscious life, in which man began to strive for such idealistic goals as happiness. According to Hartmann, mankind presently lives in this stage when the forces of irrational will and rational mind compete. Both human misery and civilization will continue to advance until misery and decay reach the maximum. Only then will the third stage be possible, a Hegelian triumph by which the will is checked and reason prevails. For individual human beings, the present requires that temptations to commit suicide and all other forms of selfishness be overcome by rational thinking. Mankind must devote itself to gradual social evolution rather than strive after an illusory and impossible happiness in the immediate future. Although Hartmann adopted the pessimistic view of the state of civilization held by Schopenhauer, he modified it with Hegel's optimistic outlook for the future of mankind. Rationalism is the only cure for irrationalism. Humanity's defining problem is that it has always preferred anything else to rationalism. Humanity's loathing of reason and logic is most revealed in its antipathy towards mathematics. Mathematics is the least human discipline you can get, as evidenced by how much humanity resists it and fears it. The average person would never admit to being retarded, but the average person has no difficulty at all in announcing to whoever wants to listen that they know nothing about mathematics and can't stand mathematics. If you're mathematically illiterate, if you have no appreciation of mathematics, if you are contemptuous towards mathematics, then you are retarded. The easy way to grasp that mathematics is the answer to everything is to realize that it's the subject furthest removed from how the average human understands himself and reality. Mathematics is regarded as an unreal abstraction even by scientists, who are wholly reliant on mathematics. What people should be saying is that mathematics is concrete reality, and that science is an unreal, man-made abstraction that approximates to actual mathematical reality. Science is based on the limited observations of the limited sense organs of limited human beings. Science can begin only when creatures with sense organs exist. But reality existed before any such creatures existed, so as surely as 1 + 1 = 2, reality in no way depends on observations, or in any way needs to observe itself in order to understand itself. It's empiricist humans that need to observe, not reality, and not rationalists. Reality is mathematical, which means that it conceives itself. It does not perceive itself. It does not require perception at all in order to comprehend itself. This great truth is anathema to science. Step 1 of science's method is to observe. Science literally goes wrong right there, in the first thing it says. It privileges the human condition over reality in itself. Reality in itself has no human sense organs, so how can human sense organs be the means to establish what reality is in itself? If reality doesn't use human sense organs to understand itself, why is science using human sense organs to do so? We have to use what reality uses. Reality uses ontological reason and logic, which is none other than ontological mathematics. No observations are required. We just need to work things out rationally, logically, deductively, conceptually, mathematically. The dark music, Ike Jackson created Neverland. Was Neverland a fantasy world where Matt Jackson could play the role of Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up with actual boys, decades younger than he was? Or was it the ultimate? Pedophiles trapped for impressionable, abusable children who loved fairgrounds, amusement parks, theme park rides, and world-famous stars. Was Jackson a dark wizard in Neverland, his castle of enchantments where he could cast spells over his victims? Was Jackson a Klingsor figure, a blue beard, with a strange home full of forbidden runes? Jackson had star power spell power that made him hard to convict, despite his constant predatory behavior with children. Fame always works its dark magic. The masses love the show, the spectacle, the circus. They don't ever want it to end. They will forgive and forget everything as long as the show goes on. Nothing is more horrifying than the final curtain, the last show, the lights going down forever. W. Pessimism. Wikipedia says Eduard von Hartmann is a pessimist, for no other view of life recognizes that evil necessarily belongs to existence and can cease only with existence itself. Pessimism is a bizarre view. If you say that existence is inherently bad, then it follows that you want existence to cease. But how can existence cease? Existence is inherently forever. It is eternal and necessary. There is no escape, so if you believe existence to be evil, then you have condemned yourself to an eternity of evil from which you can never escape. You have made the devil your god and hell your permanent home. You have elected to be one of the damned. No one made you do it. You chose your fate. Wikipedia says, but von Hartmann is not an unmitigated pessimist. The individual's happiness is indeed unattainable either here and now or hereafter and in the future, but he does not despair of ultimately releasing the unconscious from its sufferings. Buddhism, which claims that life is suffering, is the world's most pessimistic mainstream religion. However, it is not unmitigated pessimism. Buddhism claims that you yourself are the carrier of suffering, the agent, the virus of suffering, but if you can negate yourself, detach from yourself, abandon yourself, annihilate yourself, then you will become enlightened and realize you never really existed, that you were always an illusion. At that point, your sufferings are over because you yourself were the suffering. Without you, there is nothing to undergo suffering. How can you suffer if there is no you? So, Buddhism is all about curing you of the delusion that you exist. Once the you is gone, all the suffering has gone with it. You are a delusion, and therefore suffering is a delusion, because suffering is all about you. Buddhism doesn't go as far as to say that you can entirely remove yourself from existence. What it does say is that you can remove the illusion of you from existence. What remains in the absence of the illusion of you is absolute consciousness, or bare awareness, or non-duality, or cosmic consciousness, or the one, or absolute unity. This ultimate entity does not suffer. It exists in a state of permanent bliss. It is not attached to anything. It is not subject to any illusions or delusions. It does not crave things. It is not a creature of desire. Nothing torments it. But then the fatal question arises of how and why, if this is the only thing that truly exists, it gave rise to illusion, and thus suffering in the first place. Doesn't that mean it craved to produce illusion, and thus suffering? It's the source of suffering, hence suffering is inherent in it. Buddhism is consequently falsified. There is no way at all to escape existential suffering. We thus have the same situation as applies to the problem of evil in Abrahamism. If God is perfectly good, is all-powerful, and creates everything, then where does evil come from? Granted that evil somehow came into existence without God, then why, having encountered it and seen its monstrous, ungodly effects, didn't God simply eliminate it? No Abrahamist has ever provided a plausible answer to this problem. In fact, no answer could conceivably exist. The existence of evil is the proof that the Abrahamic God does not exist, just as the existence of suffering proves that Buddhism is false, since if ultimate reality does not contain suffering, why does the construct of ultimate reality contain suffering? Does it just emerge by miracle, by magic? If ultimate reality does not contain evil, or at least the seed of evil, then it cannot produce evil. If it does not contain suffering, or at least the seed of suffering, then it cannot produce suffering. It's logically impossible. In ontological mathematics, the blissful state of perfection, non-evil and non-suffering, is one that exists at zero entropy, where the hive mind, the collection of all monadic minds, is a perfect unity. It is whole, complete, harmonious, interconnected, incapable of exhibiting cruelty, competition, and selfishness, and thus incapable of experiencing evil and suffering. However, zero entropy does contain within itself the seed of competition, cruelty, selfishness, evil, and suffering. How so? Because it can, and will, generate entropy. Its entropy the property that does not exist in the zero entropy state being that causes all the trouble. Entropy is associated with becoming. Being, while itself being unable to experience entropy, can generate another domain, that of becoming. That's where entropy, and thus evil and suffering, are found. Becoming is the temporal and contingent domain, the illusory domain of Maya. Nothing in this domain has necessary existence. The domain of being cannot do anything about becoming because, like Aristotle's God, it doesn't know anything about that world about becoming. It thinks only of itself, of being. Stendhal said, God's only excuse is that he doesn't exist. The only excuse the Abrahamic God could have for not doing anything about evil is that he doesn't exist, or that he doesn't know about evil, just as being knows nothing of becoming. But if that's the case, it's impossible for God to be theistic, and intervention is the very properties essential to Abrahamism. There's no point praying to a deistic God that can't hear you. A deistic God doesn't work miracles, and doesn't care if you are good or evil. He does not offer you a choice of heaven and hell. He does not operate a system of justice and judgment. He does not punish anyone. Not only does he not care about you, he literally doesn't know you exist. As for Buddhism, it can make sense only if it is cast in terms of being and becoming. There is an ultimate reality, being, and it produces a secondary domain of becoming, which is where individuality and suffering are found. To end your suffering, you have to switch from a becoming mental mode concerned with the temporal and contingent to a being mental mode concerned with the eternal and necessary, but that entails your physical death, since it is exactly your physical body that connects you to becoming. The idea that someone such as the Buddha could be both enlightened, i.e., mentally attuned to the domain of being, and also be a physical person in the world, i.e., physically present in the domain of becoming, is comical, and proves that the Buddha was unenlightened. With ontological mathematics, the domain of becoming is embraced with all of its conflict, evil, and suffering. A great cosmic dialectic applies, and this will ultimately cure becoming by bringing the universe of becoming to an end before starting a new one via the next Big Bang. God wants the maximum experience of existence, and that entails two things. One, experiencing existence from the unitary, divine perspective of the eternal and necessary being, and two, experiencing existence from the plural, divine perspective of the temporal and contingent, where the one God of the hive mind splinters into countless individuals, all in potential conflict with each other becoming. God, exactly because it fragments into its many parts, forgets it is God. It has to remember it is God, and it does this via the dialectic of becoming, which overcomes entropic individualism and produces negentropic collectivism, and finally perfect unity. The domain of permanent unity being has only one existence, an eternal existence. The domain of disunity becoming has infinite existences via infinite temporal and contingent universes, infinite Big Bangs to get them started, and infinite Big Crunches to end them. When you look at this system in its totality, you will grasp that it is a system for giving God every possible experience. Isn't that what you would expect of God? Why would God deny itself an experience? God revels in infinite experience and infinite understanding. That is the divine life, and we are all nodes of it. In our collective node, we are God as being. In our individual node, we are all God as becoming. It's not that we are made in God's image, as Abrahamism would have it. Rather, we actually are God, God's nodes, the individual cells that comprise God. God can be understood only as a hive system. At zero entropy, all the nodes of the hive perfectly cooperate. At non-zero entropy, all the nodes of the hive are distinct individuals and then have a choice to compete or cooperate with each other. This choice is exactly what is subject to the dialectic. Look at world history. It's all about messages of competition versus messages of cooperation. In the world today, we have an economic system, predatory capitalism founded on savage competition, and we have countless right-wing individuals preaching extreme libertarianism and individualism. We also have liberals preaching love and light, unconditional love, we're all one, and so on. We are mired in the competition/cooperation dialectic that defines life in a system of nodes that can choose to be one or many. We are God when we cooperate, and we are the devil when we compete. Competition is entropic, while cooperation reduces entropy. We have the competitive individual versus the cooperative collective literally built into our psyche. The ID is the extreme individualist obsessed with personal liberty and the pleasure principle, while the superego is the extreme collectivist obsessed with the collective good and the morality principle. The ID thesis and superego antithesis are always fighting it out. The agent of the dialectical synthesis is the ego, obeying the reality principle. It mediates between ID and superego and looks for the optimal compromise. In politics, the right-wing libertarian is always preaching extreme individualism and hatred of the collective, while the left-wing activist is always denouncing the selfish, greedy, narcissistic, psychopathic, and sociopathic individualist. The dialectic is, mathematically, a system designed to bring maximum mental entropy, the Big Bang, down to zero entropy, the Big Crunch, by applying synthesis after synthesis cooperation to the constant struggle of thesis and antithesis competition, until we arrive at the grand synthesis, the absolute, where all competition has been eliminated. Left-wingers are godly people who love cooperation, while right-wingers are satanic people who love competition. Right-wingers are always supremacists, nationalists, racists, patriots, xenophobes, conservatives, the chosen people, the master race, the saved, the elect, those with a manifest destiny. Left-wingers always support the brotherhood of man, tolerance, egalitarianism, social justice. Communism is the left-wing ideal and also a foreshadowing of the zero-entropy hive mind. Entropy means that the single, unitary mind breaks into the maximum number of individual minds, which all then savagely compete with each other until they rationally come to their senses and start to cooperate with each other. A process that culminates in all minds eventually coming back to perfect unity. And then the whole thing begins again with the next Big Bang. It's all encoded in the mathematics of the universe. Zero entropy is mathematically guaranteed to be subject to the disruption of asymmetry, which is responsible for the generation of entropy becoming space, time, temperature, and matter. Wikipedia says, Eduard von Hartmann differs from Schopenhauer in making salvation collective by the negation of the will to live depend on a collective social effort and not on individualistic asceticism. Buddhism, like Schopenhauer's philosophy, privileges the individual over the collective. The idea is that the individual can escape from the horror all by himself. In fact, we are all nodes of hive mind, and we're all in this thing together. The end of the physical universe isn't brought about by individual enlightenment, but by collective enlightenment. No Buddhist ever wants to imagine that it's all about others and not about themselves. Have you noticed that Buddhists are some of the most antisocial and misanthropic people in the world? What is meditation? It's wholly antisocial. It's all about the selfish, self-obsessed individual. It's all about the narcissistic and deluded idea that in a collective system, the individual doesn't need anyone else. It's libertarianism, extreme individualism gone mad. It's spiritual libertarianism, as opposed to the more familiar Randian libertarianism based on money. Buddhism is endarkenment. It's the exact way not to achieve enlightenment. To become enlightened, you must understand that we are all connected, hence enlightenment is a collective effort based on universal cooperation, not an individual effort based on universal competition like Buddhism and predatory capitalism. Imagine how different Buddhism would be if it were about the collective rather than the individual, about collective karma rather than individual karma, about collective illusion rather than individual illusion, about collective suffering rather than individual suffering, about collective enlightenment rather than individual enlightenment. This new worldview would spell the end of individual meditation, individual mindfulness, individual sitting under trees, and all the rest of the nonsense and idiocy of the Buddha's teachings. It's not about you, it's about everyone. That's why real enlightenment is so hard to achieve. You have to care about others and not just yourself, and that's the hardest thing for competitive minds to do. The last thing people who are consumed with their own issues can ever be is enlightened. Shouldn't that be self-evident? The golden rule is do as you would be done by. Love your neighbor. That's the most difficult task for average human beings who would eagerly cut your throat to get ahead. Wikipedia says, the conception of a redemption of the unconscious also supplies the ultimate basis of von Hartmann's ethics. We must provisionally affirm life and devote ourselves to social evolution, instead of striving after a happiness which is impossible. In so doing we shall find that morality renders life less unhappy than it would otherwise be. Suicide and all other forms of selfishness are highly reprehensible. Von Hartmann was a much greater man than the Buddha. He understood that enlightenment is a social activity, a collective undertaking. Hegel had already preached that exact message. All Buddhists, if they were decent human beings, would convert to Hegelianism and Hartmannism. The altruistic collective must always be the focus, not the selfish individual. There is no more harmful and satanic ideology than that of libertarian extreme individualism, the gospel of Ayn Rand and her far-right ilk. Wikipedia says the essential feature of the morality built upon the basis of Hartmann's philosophy is the realization that all is one, and that, while every attempt to gain happiness is illusory, yet before deliverance is possible, all forms of the illusion must appear and be tried to the utmost. Isn't this a remarkable idea? We have to exhaust every illusion, every dumb idea, every selfish act, every false religion, philosophy, and science before we arrive at the truth, the last truth the average person wants, namely mathematics. Sin for salvation. The world is an arena for having experiences, and the system wants us to have as many experiences as we can before bringing the show to a close. This means that the truth is not easily come by. If we reach truth on the first day, the world would end on the first day. In fact, we reach the truth as a collective only on the last day. Some minds reach the truth long before then, but they then suffer from the Cassandra problem. No one believes them. Wikipedia says, even he who recognizes the vanity of life best serves the highest aims by giving himself up to the illusion, and living as eagerly as if he thought life good. It is only through the constant attempt to gain happiness that people can learn the desirability of nothingness, and when this knowledge has become universal, or at least general, deliverance will come, and the world will cease. In fact, what people eventually long for is not nothingness per se, but rather nothingness as zero entropy, as perfect being, as total unity, wholeness, completeness, interconnection, harmony as God. They cease to want to compete to be individuals and long to be a part of the collective, the arena of perfect cooperation, mutual respect, oneness. Wikipedia says, it is the best of all possible worlds, which contains the promise of the redemption of the unconscious from actual existence by the exercise of reason in partnership with the will and the consciousness of the enlightened pessimist. Reason is the savior, the messiah, the deliverer. There is no other. Solving the problem of existence is an intellectual exercise. It has nothing to do with faith, feelings, mysticism, prayer, hymns, worship, meditation, mindfulness, and all the rest of it. That's all an evasion of the truth. No one wants the truth, except the most rational people. Wikipedia says, acting on its own, the will creates absolute misery. As consciousness develops, there is a constantly growing recognition of the fact that deliverance must lie in a return to the original state of non-willing, which means the non-existence of all individuals and the potentiality of the unconscious. Competition is the driver of the will. The will can only be ended through cooperation, and only reason can work that out. Look at the world we live in today. It's full of irrational libertarians. The gospel of extreme individualism is preached everywhere, and the collective is always held in contempt and even portrayed as something sinister. Ayn Rand opposed the collective in every way. She said selfishness is virtuous. Margaret Thatcher, the UK's version of Rand, said there is no such thing as society. Thatcher's buddy Ronald Reagan said government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem. Bill Clinton said the era of big government is over. These are all the irrationalist sentiments of those that despise the collective, that hate cooperation, that denounce positive liberty. They are all negative libertarians through and through. They are the agents of evil, i.e., extreme willfulness devoted entirely to self-aggrandizement. Look at the likes of Donald Trump, evil incarnate. There are legions of these narcissists. It's all about them. They foundationally despise other people. But here's the reality. We are not on our own. We are part of a collective mind, a hive mind, and we all succeed only when we all act together in the same direction. Reason brings us all together. Until we are rational, we cannot be united. Instead, anything but rationalism is preached by humanity. We are bombarded with faith, mysticism, emotionalism, empiricism, love and light, consumerism, predatory capitalism, and all the rest of it. Everything is preached except what truly needs to be heard, the gospel of reason and logic. Reason is the great unifier. There is only one rational solution to existence, ontological mathematics. Wikipedia says, when the greater part of the will in existence is so far enlightened by reason as to perceive the inevitable misery of existence, a collective effort to will non-existence will be made, and the world will relapse into nothingness, the unconscious into quiescence. Reason brings about the drive to the big crunch, where all minds at last learn to merge into a single blissful organism God. Before then, they are all in savage competition with each other. They are the devil. The devil is individualism entropy, competing wills. God is collectivism zero entropy, cooperating wills that merge to create a single will. A single will does not compete against itself and does not traumatize itself. There's nothing hard about understanding existence. The hard thing is convincing others. The hard thing is getting people to abandon their compulsion to always look out for no. 1. The essence of the devil's message. Why did the devil fall? It was because he believed himself superior to God. The individual believed he was better than the collective. He believed his light shone brighter, that his glory surpassed all others. You see the devil's narcissism every time Donald Trump opens his mouth. Trump cares only for himself. He is the most selfish man on earth, amongst some very stiff competition.